of many children's lives. They provide comfort in times of stress, companionship when they're lonely, someone to boss around when they feel powerless, and someone to blame for the broken lamp in the living room. Most important, an imaginary companion is a tool young children use to help them make sense of the adult world. You can learn a lot about your child, especially the stresses he's feeling and the developmental skills he's trying to master, by paying attention to how and when his imaginary companions appear. They usually first appear, at least according to children's own reports, at around age 2.5 to 3, which is about the same time children are starting complex fantasy play. The occurrence of imaginary companions and fantasy play tell you that your child is beginning to think abstractly, which is a remarkable event. Children at this age have learned to replace physical objects with mental images of those objects. That may sound a bit strange at first. All it means is that a 3-year-old can get a feeling of security by thinking about a favorite teddy bear, as well as by holding the bear itself. The abstract image or concept stands in for the physical object. We can see this development of abstract thinking in another important area as well: children's fears. Infants and toddlers tend to be afraid of such things as growling dog or a thunderstorm, things that are actually there at that moment. These are known as concrete fears. Preschoolers, however, begin to show different fears. They talk about ghosts in the closet, monsters under the bed, or burglars breaking into their room. These are abstract fears. The things they are frightened of don't have to be there at the time. From a developmental perspective, a child's fear of monsters under the bed is a reason for celebration. It tells you that the child is struggling to master the intricacies of abstract thinking. Preschoolers and older children may turn to imaginary companions for more practical and short-term problems in their lives. A 3-year-old who started attending a new child care center handled the stress of that transition by inventing a trope of invisible animals that became his playmates. As soon as he felt comfortable with the other children in the center, and after he'd been regularly included in their play, his imaginary animals quietly disappeared. They were no longer necessary. Studies of preschoolers conducted at Yale University have shown that imaginary companions, like highly creative fantasy play in general, are most common among firstborn and only children. Dr. Jerome L. Singer, who has conducted much of the research on early creativity, found that children who had imaginary companions were more imaginative, got along better with classmates, appeared happier, and had a richer vocabulary than children who did not. Some preschoolers become so absorbed in their fantasies that they'll insist that you set an extra plate at dinner or not sit in an empty chair because it's already occupied by the imaginary friend. You shouldn't make a big deal over this. In fact, going through with it can be fun. Remember that in almost all cases, having an imaginary companion isn't a sign that anything's wrong. It's a way for your child to feel more secure and to handle everyday stresses. That doesn't mean that you should have to go along with your child's requests. If you want to set an extra plate at the table, that's fine. Remember that you can also tell your child that his imaginary friend will have to share a plate with him or must eat from an invisible plate. Sometimes children will use their imaginary companions to test their limits of allowable behavior. Having an invisible friend gives the child what politicians call maximum deniability. If the child does or says something bad, he can blame it on his imaginary companion. Let your child know that his friend has to abide by the same rules as he does. Finally, don't insist that your child admit that his imaginary companion doesn't really exist. Rest assured that he knows that. In fact, if you push your child too hard in the other direction, treating his invisible friend as if you truly believed he did exist, your child will probably become upset and perhaps a bit frightened. Excerpted from Midnight Monsters and Imaginary Companions, February 17, 2009. This marks the end of the reading.